Okay, so you guys sent in some super interesting stuff about how much it costs to actually run, an industrial biotech operation.
Yeah.
And it's like something that we don't often think about, but it's like the bread and butter, right? Like
Hmm.
once you've actually built the thing and you've got the equipment all shiny and new, how much does it actually cost to keep the lights on and all that? So today we're going to be kind of like pulling out the most important pieces of these, operating cost estimates and figuring out why they really matter.
Yeah. And we're really talking about once the factory's built,
Yeah.
the equipment's going,
Yeah.
you know, the day-to-day expenses,
Right. Exactly.
keeping the wheels turning, so to speak.
The wheels turning. Love that.
Yeah.
So the material that you guys sent kind of breaks it down into categories, which already makes it feel less overwhelming,
Yeah.
like less daunting. And the first one is raw materials,
Right.
which, okay, it's obviously more than just the main ingredients, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, just thinking about industrial biotech, you've got your carbon source, could be something simple like glucose or even molasses.
Okay.
Then you've got your nitrogen source, like ammonium salts or yeast extract.
Right.
But then on top of that, you have to think about all the other nutrients, vitamins, minerals, even things like anti-foaming agents, all this stuff
Oh, wow.
that's necessary for the process to actually work.
So it's not just about the sticker price of that glucose, right? Like it sounds like the choice of carbon source, for instance, can really have these knock-on effects later down the line.
Yeah, for sure. Like it can affect how easy it is to purify your product, later down the line.
Interesting.
It can affect your costs, even in unexpected ways, like if you switch to a less viscous feedstock,
Okay.
you could actually save a lot on your pumping energy costs.
Interesting.
Because all these like hidden interconnected factors.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. So many things to consider. Okay, then we've got utilities, right? So electricity, water, steam, you obviously need these things. But like, what are the details, the nuances here?
Well, I think what's so fascinating here is just like the sheer number of different utilities you have to think about.
Right.
So yeah, you need electricity for, everything, from the mixers in your bioreactors
Okay.
to the equipment that purifies the product.
Got it.
But then you also need steam. You need steam for sterilization, a really important step in biotech.
Right.
Cooling water, keeping the temperatures right where they need to be.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you need water itself.
Right. Which is probably not just like tap water,
Well, I
right?
don't know. Often it needs to be like highly purified,
Oh, wow.
for specific uses in the process.
Okay.
Even something like compressed air, if you're using aeration in your process,
Yeah.
that adds a cost as well.
I wouldn't have thought of that. Wow.
And then, energy costs are one of the things that can be a real bottleneck for a lot of processes.
Especially these days.
Exactly. So being able to optimize, something as simple as your fermentation temperature,
Okay.
even by a few degrees, can lead to huge savings.
Really? Wow.
So that's why precise process control is so important.
I see. So it's all about optimization. It's all about fine tuning.
No,
It's not just set it and forget it.
Not at all.
That's fascinating. It's really
Mhm.
interesting to think about. Okay, so when you lay it all out like that, it makes you realize just how energy intensive some of these biotech processes can be.
Sure.
Okay, moving right along, we've got labor costs.
Right.
And it's more than just the scientists in their lab coats, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're talking about everyone who's involved in actually making the product.
Okay.
Your operators, supervisors,
Yeah.
but then also the people who are making sure the product is high quality.
Right. QC.
Exactly. QA/QC.
Yeah.
And then your maintenance and engineering teams.
Keeping things running.
Keeping everything running smoothly. Exactly.
So really that boils down to what? Their hourly rates times the total number of hours they're working.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then we've got consumables and supplies.
Right.
Now, this sounds like the things that you're constantly having to replenish.
Yeah, exactly. The things you're always buying more of, So think about filters to purify your product.
Okay.
Chromatography resins. These are the specialized materials you use to separate your product from everything else.
Right.
Chemicals, reagents, even simple things like lab glassware, protective gear,
Yeah.
packaging materials.
Oh, right. Of course.
All of this stuff adds up.
It all adds up. Wow.
And each of these things has a cost per unit, but then you also need to factor in how often you're replacing them.
Oh, right. Right.
So the frequency of replacement is really important.
I see. I see. So it's not just like a one-time purchase. It's like an ongoing
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So we've made our product. We've got all those supplies. Now we've got to get rid of the stuff we don't need. Waste disposal costs.
Yeah, this is a big one, and it really depends on what kind of waste you're dealing with.
Okay.
So you might have biomass left over from the process,
Uh-huh.
spent growth media,
Okay.
maybe some solvent waste, and then in some cases you could even have hazardous waste.
Yeah.
So each of these has to be disposed of in a specific way,
Yeah.
and the cost can vary a lot.
It can be anything from just checking it in a landfill to like needing a special facility, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it could be really simple or really complex depending on the type of waste.
Got it. Okay, so that's another big one to consider. And then, of course, to keep everything running smoothly, there's maintenance and repair.
Absolutely. And this is where you have to think about preventative maintenance, trying to avoid problems before they happen,
Right.
but then also the actual repairs when something does break down.
Of course.
The cost of keeping spare parts on hand,
Yeah.
the labor costs for your maintenance team. So it's a lot to think about. And a common way to estimate this is to budget a certain percentage of your total equipment cost per year for maintenance.
Okay.
That percentage can vary a lot, depending on how complex the equipment is, how old it is.
Right. I mean, older equipment, more complex equipment probably needs more upkeep, right?
Exactly.
So that would push that percentage higher.
For sure. And also, if you're in an industry with a lot of regulations,
Okay.
you might have to do maintenance more often,
Right.
and that can drive up the cost as well.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, and then finally we have overhead costs.
Right.
Now these feel like the more fixed, behind the scenes kind of expenses.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So this is things like rent or depreciation of the buildings themselves,
Okay.
property taxes, insurance, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Even like, basic utility costs,
Yeah.
regardless of how much you're producing,
Right.
security administrative costs.
Got it.
And then you also have the costs of making sure the product is high quality. So running your quality assurance department,
Right. Right.
meeting regulations, validating your processes, that kind of thing.
QAQC. Yep.
Exactly. And these tend to be more fixed. They don't fluctuate as much as some of the other costs.
Okay, so that gives us a really good breakdown of all the different costs involved.
Yeah.
But the question is, how do you actually put a number on all of this? How do you estimate what these costs are going to be?
Right. Well, the sources you sent mentioned a few different approaches, and it's kind of interesting how many different tools there are to help you do this.
Yeah, walk us through them.
So you could do a super detailed cost analysis, break down every single input,
Okay,
figure out how much of each thing you need.
got it.
You can get quotes from vendors for things like raw materials and utilities.
No, smart.
So you get real world prices.
Yeah.
Looking at historical data can also be helpful, seeing what similar companies have spent in the past.
Right, benchmarking.
Exactly. That can give you a good starting point.
Yeah.
Now, for more complex processes, you might actually use process simulation and modeling.
Oh, wow.
So this is where you're using software to essentially create a virtual version of your process.
Okay.
And you can use that to predict things like your utility consumption under different conditions.
That's so cool.
Yeah, pretty powerful stuff.
Wow.
And then, of course, you get your classic spreadsheet-based cost models.
Right. Can't forget those.
Yeah, those are essential for organizing all this data and seeing how changes in one area affect the overall cost.
Right, because everything's connected, right? Like changing one thing can have these ripple effects.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. So, okay, we've talked about all these different costs. We've talked about how to estimate them.
Yeah.
But I think the big question for everyone listening is, why does this matter to me? Like, why should I care about all this?
Right. Well, I think the key takeaway here is that understanding these operating costs and how to estimate them is really crucial for figuring out if a project is even going to be profitable,
Right.
whether it's worth doing in the first place.
Yeah, it's the foundation of the whole thing, right? Like, if it's going to cost you more to make something than you can sell it for, then what's the point?
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you're in biotech or any other kind of manufacturing.
Yeah.
This is fundamental.
Right. And if you don't have accurate estimates, then even something as basic as pricing your product
Yeah.
or just planning your finances, it becomes so much riskier.
Absolutely. You're flying blind without this information.
Totally, totally. So I think this has been a really great deep dive into operating costs.
Yeah, it's been fun.
But I want to leave everyone with one final thought to kind of chew on.
Okay.
So thinking about all these different cost categories, raw materials, utilities, labor, all that,
Yeah.
which one do you think is the most sensitive? Like, which one has the biggest potential to make or break the profitability of your project?
Right. Like, what's the linchpin?
Exactly. The linchpin. I love that word. So think about that. What's the most important cost category for your specific area of interest?
Yeah, what's the one you really need to keep an eye on?
Exactly.
Definitely something to think about.
It's a great question to leave everyone with, so thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.